This isn't just tea hype. Scientists found an oolong molecule that activates survival pathways most seniors never tap into, and I'll break down exactly how it works. What's remarkable is this. It was never marketed as a longevity tool. There were no bold claims, no anti-aging labels, and that may be exactly why it works. Over my decades in medicine, I've watched people chase longevity through aggressive interventions, hard supplements, extreme diets, punishing routines. And I've also watched those strategies backfire after 60, when the body becomes less forgiving. What most people don't realize is that aging after 60 is not driven by dramatic failure, but by quiet biological erosion. Low-grade inflammation, metabolic slowdown, and cellular stress that builds silently year after year. This is where the wisdom of Dr. Shigeaki Hinohara becomes so important. He spent over a century studying not just how long people live, but how they age. One of his guiding beliefs was simple, yet profoundly counter to modern health culture. He said, "The body ages best when it is quietly protected, not aggressively pushed." That sentence alone should make us stop. After 60, your cells are already working harder just to maintain balance. Inflammation simmers beneath the surface. Insulin signaling becomes less efficient. Repair systems slow down. And yet, most advice tells you to push harder. More stimulation, more intensity, more everything. The result? The body interprets this as stress, not support. This is where traditional practices matter. Dr. Andrew Weil has long emphasized that certain time-tested beverages don't act like drugs. They act like daily modulators, gently influencing inflammation, stress response, and metabolic rhythm in a way the body can actually accept, especially later in life. Oolong tea fits squarely into this category. Within oolong tea is a specific molecule, formed naturally during its unique partial oxidation process, that researchers are now examining for its role in metabolic health, inflammation control, and cellular resilience. Not as a cure, not as a miracle, but as a quiet, consistent signal that helps aging cells behave more like they used to. Today, we're going to walk through this carefully. No hype, no exaggeration, just clarity. We'll cover 4 insights. First, why aging accelerates after 60 at the cellular level. Then, the specific oolong tea molecule gaining attention in longevity science. After that, why this matters more now than earlier in life. And finally, most important, how seniors can use this safely without overstimulation or harmful interactions. Before we go any further, I want you to pause for a moment. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I read every single one. Now let's begin with what's really happening inside your cells after 60, and why small daily molecules matter more than ever. After 60, something subtle but decisive changes inside the body. Aging no longer moves in slow, predictable steps. It begins to accelerate, not because the body suddenly fails, but because its internal systems lose efficiency at the same time. Many people assume aging speed is locked in by genetics or birthday candles. In reality, what I've seen repeatedly in clinical settings is that aging after 60 is driven less by time itself and more by biological friction. At the cellular level, 3 forces quietly intensify. First, oxidative stress rises. This means cells are exposed to more molecular damage from normal metabolism than they can comfortably repair. Think of it as tiny sparks landing on delicate machinery. When repair systems are young, the sparks are extinguished quickly. With age, more sparks land than can be handled. Second, insulin signaling becomes less responsive. Glucose doesn't move into cells as smoothly, which forces the body to work harder to manage energy. Over time, this creates a state where cells are constantly negotiating fuel instead of using it efficiently. Energy production becomes erratic, and inflammation follows. Third, inflammatory signaling increases, even when there is no infection or injury. This is often called low-grade or silent inflammation. It doesn't announce itself with pain right away. Instead, it slowly interferes with tissue repair, brain signaling, joint comfort, and metabolic stability. A helpful way to picture this is machinery running without lubrication. The parts still move, nothing looks broken, but friction builds quietly. Heat rises, wear accelerates, and eventually, systems that once worked effortlessly begin to struggle all at once. This is why so many people describe the same experience after 60. Energy feels less reliable. Recovery takes longer. Weight shifts despite unchanged habits. Inflammation appears without a clear cause. None of this feels dramatic in the beginning, which is why it's often dismissed as just aging. But biologically, what's happening is more precise than that. The aging body becomes far more sensitive to metabolic strain and inflammatory load. Anything that adds stress tends to compound the problem. Anything that gently reduces friction can slow the process meaningfully. This is where daily inputs begin to matter more than heroic interventions, not because the body is weak, but because it has become selective. After 60, the body responds best to signals that calm, regulate, and stabilize, not signals that overstimulate. That context matters deeply as we move forward, because it explains why certain traditional compounds, especially those consumed gently and consistently, appear to have outsized effects later in life. With that foundation in place, it becomes much easier to understand why one specific molecule in oolong tea is now drawing attention in longevity research. If you value calm, science-grounded ways to age with clarity instead of hype, consider subscribing. These conversations are for people who prefer quiet wisdom over loud promises, and they continue here. Tea is often spoken about as if it were a single category, as though all leaves behave the same once they touch hot water. From a biological perspective, that assumption overlooks something critical. Oolong tea occupies a narrow and unusual middle ground. It is neither fully green nor fully black. During its partial oxidation process, the tea leaf undergoes controlled enzymatic changes that do not occur in other teas. It is within this window that a distinct group of polyphenols forms, known as thiosinensins. These compounds are not added. They are not extracted. They are created naturally as the leaf transitions between states. What makes thiosinensins interesting to aging researchers is not their strength, but their behavior. Unlike more aggressive antioxidants that act like blunt instruments, thiosinensins appear to influence how cells communicate. They interact with pathways involved in metabolic signaling and inflammatory balance, rather than forcing a single outcome. A useful way to imagine this is traffic control within a city. When signals are poorly timed, congestion builds, energy is wasted, stress increases. When signals are coordinated, flow improves without adding speed. Thiosinensins appear to function in this quieter role, helping cells manage energy traffic and stress signals more smoothly. This may help explain why populations with long-standing traditions of oolong consumption often show steadier metabolic markers over time, not dramatically lower, not extreme, just more stable. And stability after 60 is a powerful biological advantage. Another detail worth noting is how these compounds behave alongside caffeine. Oolong tea contains caffeine, but its release tends to be slower and more moderated when consumed in traditional form. The presence of polyphenols appears to soften the stimulatory edge, resulting in a more even physiological response. This balance matters. Aging systems are far less tolerant of sharp spikes, whether in blood sugar, stress hormones, or stimulation. Thiosinensins seem to work best not by pushing cells harder, but by helping them respond with less friction. Preparation also plays a role in preserving this effect. Traditional oolong teas brewed gently maintain the integrity of these compounds. Over-processing, heavy sweetening, or aggressive extraction changes how the body receives the signal. What's important here is not the idea of a miracle molecule, but the recognition of a pattern. When a compound forms naturally, is consumed modestly, and has been part of daily life for generations, it often interacts with the body in ways that modern interventions struggle to replicate. This brings us to an even more important point. The impact of these compounds is not uniform across the lifespan. Their relevance changes as the body ages, and after 60, that change becomes especially meaningful. That is what we'll look at next. One of the quieter misunderstandings about aging is the assumption that supportive compounds affect the body the same way at every stage of life. In earlier decades, the body carries large internal reserves. Repair systems are faster. Antioxidant production is stronger. Metabolic flexibility is wider. Many inputs make only a modest difference because the system already has backup. After 60, that equation changes. With advancing age, the body's internal antioxidant and repair systems gradually weaken. This does not mean they disappear, but they become less responsive and slower to mobilize. Cellular cleanup processes lose efficiency. Mitochondria, the energy centers of the cell, produce energy with more waste and less precision. In this environment, external compounds begin to play a different role. Polyphenols, such as those found in oolong tea, no longer behave like optional enhancements. They begin to function more like structural supports. Earlier in life, they may decorate the system. Later in life, they help stabilize it. A useful analogy is an aging building. When the structure is new, small supports are barely noticeable. As the structure ages, those same supports help redistribute load and reduce stress points. The importance of modest, consistent reinforcement increases as natural resilience declines. This is why small daily inputs often show more visible effects later in life than they did decades earlier. The body is no longer overflowing with reserves. It becomes more responsive to signals that reduce oxidative burden, steady metabolic rhythm, and soften inflammatory tone. This also explains why timing and quantity matter more with age. Aging nervous and hormonal systems respond differently to stimulation. Substances that once felt neutral can feel disruptive if taken too late in the day or in excessive amounts. Balance becomes more important than intensity. What often emerges with consistent, moderate exposure is not a surge of energy, but steadiness. Energy feels calmer. Blood sugar fluctuations soften. Mental clarity becomes more predictable. These changes are subtle, but they compound over time, which is exactly how longevity is shaped. Understanding this shift in biology helps clarify why oolong tea's effects are often described as gentle rather than dramatic. And it sets the stage for the most important consideration of all: how this tea is used in a way that supports aging systems instead of straining them. That brings us to the final and most counterintuitive insight. There is a subtle paradox in aging biology that rarely gets discussed. The same substances that support longevity in moderate amounts can quietly undermine it when pushed too far. This is especially true after 60, when stress response systems lose their youthful elasticity. With oolong tea, the key lies not in intensity, but in dose and timing. At moderate levels, the compounds in oolong tea appear to support pathways involved in metabolic regulation, including AMPK, a cellular sensor often associated with energy balance and repair. When this pathway is gently engaged, cells tend to favor efficiency over excess. Inflammatory signaling softens. Metabolic rhythm becomes more predictable. At higher levels, however, the picture changes. Caffeine, even when buffered by polyphenols, can elevate cortisol. In younger bodies, cortisol spikes are short-lived and adaptive. In aging systems, they can linger, subtly increasing inflammation, disrupting sleep architecture, and placing additional strain on already taxed regulatory systems. A helpful analogy is seasoning in cooking. A small amount enhances the entire dish. Too much overwhelms it. Oolong tea appears to work the same way. Its benefit comes from restraint, not force. What researchers and long-term observers often note is that the effects associated with oolong tea are not immediate or dramatic. They unfold gradually. Over weeks, patterns begin to shift. Energy feels calmer rather than sharper. Metabolic stability improves without fanfare. The nervous system feels less reactive. These are the kinds of changes that don't announce themselves loudly, but they matter deeply over time. Timing plays an equally important role. Earlier consumption tends to align more naturally with circadian rhythms, while later intake can interfere with the body's ability to fully downshift in the evening. Aging sleep systems are especially sensitive to this, even when the individual does not consciously feel stimulated. Quantity also shapes the response. Observationally, 1 cup in the morning, with an optional second earlier in the day, aligns best with the body's changing tolerance after 60. Beyond that, the balance can tilt away from support and toward stimulation, which is rarely helpful in the context of longevity. It's also worth acknowledging individual variability. Sensitivity to caffeine increases with age, and interactions with certain medications become more relevant. In these cases, the absence of oolong tea can be just as appropriate as its inclusion. Longevity is not about forcing a ritual, but about respecting the body's signals as they evolve. When viewed this way, oolong tea stops looking like a hack or a shortcut. It becomes what it has been for centuries in traditional cultures, a quiet ally, something that supports the body's internal dialogue rather than interrupting it. With that understanding in place, we can now step back and look at the broader picture of what longevity really asks of us after 60, and why small, respectful rituals often outlast aggressive strategies. When people talk about longevity today, the conversation often sounds tense and aggressive. More supplements, stronger interventions, faster results. Yet, after decades of watching bodies age in real clinical settings, a different pattern becomes impossible to ignore. The individuals who age with the most stability, clarity, and dignity are rarely the ones pushing the hardest. They are usually the ones protecting balance. This perspective was central to the thinking of Dr. Shigeaki Hinohara, who observed aging not as something to fight, but as something to steward. He understood that the body, especially after 60, responds best when it feels safe. Safe from constant stimulation, safe from metabolic overload, safe from unnecessary stress. His belief that the body ages best when it is quietly protected is not poetic language, it is biological reality. After 60, systems that once compensated easily begin to narrow their margin for error. Inflammation lingers longer. Cortisol clears more slowly. Sleep becomes lighter. Recovery takes more time. None of this means decline is inevitable. It means the body has become more honest. It responds clearly to what helps and what harms. This is where small, consistent rituals gain their power. Not because they are dramatic, but because they are repeatable. A traditional beverage like oolong tea does not shout at the nervous system. It whispers. Its compounds do not override physiology. They cooperate with it. Over time, that cooperation can shape steadier energy, calmer metabolic patterns, and a less inflammatory internal environment. This aligns closely with the philosophy long shared by Dr. Andrew Weil, who has often emphasized that practices surviving across centuries tend to endure because they support regulation rather than disruption. They do not promise quick fixes. They support long-term balance. There is dignity in this approach to aging. It does not frame the body as failing. It recognizes adaptation. It replaces urgency with awareness. It allows space for the body to do what it still knows how to do when given the right conditions. It is also essential to remain grounded. No tea, habit, or compound replaces medical care or erases complexity. Longevity is not built from a single action. It is shaped by alignment between daily inputs and an aging physiology that values calm over intensity. What often surprises people is how powerful consistency becomes later in life. One modest ritual repeated daily can matter more than occasional extremes. After 60, aging is shaped quietly through what is done with restraint, respect, and patience. Sometimes, that influence arrives in something as simple as a warm cup held in steady hands, supporting the body rather than demanding from it.